Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So this video is a small crash course on RTK Query tool offered by Redux Toolkit. We will create a React Redux project and implement the CRUD operation API using RTK Query and Mutations. We will understand how RTK Query helps us in data fetching, caching, managing the API request states using queries and mutations. So if this sounds interesting, then stick around. Also, don't forget to subscribe the channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss the videos like this one. So let's get started. Around March-April, appraisals happen in most jobs. Appraisal means salary hikes. But this is not the only thing an employee expects from a job. A good job is so much more than just money, right? After working hard for a whole year, people expect to be valued, appreciated, promoted, and get some liberty to make decisions. But when we don't get all this, there is a voice in our head that motivates us to move on to something better, isn't it? Startups anyway have a high demand for experienced people. But then you will say where to find such startups. And finding a new job is also pretty difficult. On Hirect, you get both these things. It is India's first direct hiring app. With Hirect, you can smoothly search for jobs, chat directly with the startup founders and CEOs, get hired quickly. And also, no consultants are involved here. Over 1,20,000 plus startups are already hiring on Hirect. So to find a job, you don't have to do anything. Just click on the link given in the description box and install the app. Then you create a profile by answering the given questions. The AI-based algorithm of the app will match you automatically with the relevant job profiles. Also, you don't worry about the data privacy because Hirect never shares your personal details with any recruiters without your permission. So click on the link in the description box and switch to the job that you always wanted on Hirect. In the season of appraisals, if you want something more than salary increments, then don't forget to download the Hirect app. Here, you can chat directly with over 120,000 startup founders without any consultants. So click on the link in the description and with Hirect, career hike करके तो देखो. I've already bootstrapped my React application, and if you want to bootstrap your React application, then you can use the, let me go to the terminal, and inside the terminal, you can use the npx create React app and the name of your application. For me, the name I have given is the RTK Query Tutorial, and then you need to specify the template, and we are using the Redux TypeScript template. So it's going to bootstrap the application with TypeScript, and I will also have the Redux package already installed. So let's go to the package JSON and let's see, we have the Redux installed. So this is our Redux installed. And if we go, then we have the Redux toolkit as well, because we are going to use the RTK query, which is offered by the Redux toolkit package. All right, and let's go to the source folder, and inside the source folder, if I go to the index.tsx, then I have the default code. I haven't changed anything here. And in the app.tsx, we have the default code. So I'm running my application on the local development environment. So if I go here, then we see that our application is running on the localhost 3000. So let's go here and let's see. So this is our application, which is already running on the development environment. So before starting, let's understand what this RTK query is all about. And let's go to the official documentation of the RTK query. So let's go to the official documentation. And if we see here, then it says that RTK query is a powerful data fetching. So that means it helps us to fetch the data from the server and cache that data for the future use. And it is designed to simplify the common use cases for loading data in the application. So we don't have to write manually the logic for the loading, fetching, and error part for whenever we make an API call to the server. And RTK query will take care of all of these tasks for us. And to use the RTK query, you don't need to install separately some package or a library. It is an optional add-on included in the Redux Toolkit package, and its functionality is built on top of the other APIs in the Redux Toolkit. So let's go and let's start. So if you want to explore further about the RTK query, then I'm going to add the link of this documentation in the description of the video so that you can go and check it out. So if I scroll down, then we see that what actually is included in this RTK query. So this RTK query is already installed within the core Redux Toolkit package. And if we go to our package JSON, then we will see that we already have this Redux Toolkit installed. That means we have all the APIs to build the service using the RTK query. So let's go back and what actually it is offering in that API. So it offers the create API. So we will make use of this create API to create the query. And then it has the fetch base query, which actually where we define our base URL for the APIs. And then it also provides the API provider. So in the past, we have used the Redux Toolkit and built a project for the movie application. So if you have missed that video, then you can click on the card above and jump to it directly. So in that, you will see that we always wrap our app component with the provider and we provide a store. But let's say that if you are not using a Redux store and you haven't set up the Redux store, then in that case, if you want to make use of this create API and use the API in your component, then you can wrap your app component in the API provider. So this is just an alternative way of using the RTK query. Now let's go to our Visual Studio Code and let's building the API service. So I'm going to go to my Visual Studio Code and in the source folder, I'm going to create a folder first. So I will go to the source and in the source, I'm going to create a folder for services. All right. And this is going to contain all your services for the application. So I'm going to create an API. So let me have the API.tsx. All right. And in that, what we are going to do is let's first import the create API and fetch query base. So I'm going to have the import and I will have the create API. All right. And we will also have the fetch base query. All right. And these both will be coming from the Redux. So let me have the Redux toolkit and then I'm going to have the slash query and then I'm going to have the React. All right. And you will find this how to import it. If we go to the documentation, then you will see that either you can use it like this, the Redux toolkit query, or if you want to be more specific to the React, you can add a React in the end. And we are more specific to the React. That's why I have used this query slash React. All right, the next thing we will do is let's create a constant and I'm going to have the API, which will be equals to this create API. And this is going to take an object. So let me add the object here. And in this object, the first thing we need to set is the base query. So we will add the base query and this base query will have the fetch base query. And inside the fetch base query, we need to add the base URL of the endpoint, which we are going to call to fetch the data. But for our project, what I have done is I have set up a JSON server for the mock API. And let me show you the JSON server, which I have already set up. So this is the JSON server, which I have already set up. And if I go to the DB JSON, then you will see that we have the resource as contacts and I have an array of the contacts and each of the contact contains the ID, name, and the email address. So if you don't know about how to set up a JSON server or how to create the mock APIs using the JSON server, then I have a video on it. You can click on the card above and jump to it directly. So I'm already running my JSON server. And if we want to see the output, then this is how it looks. So this is the JSON server. We are running it on the localhost 3006. And this is our resource of the contacts. And if I click on this contact, then we are going to see all the contacts. All right. And now we can have the different HTTP methods on this resource like the get, post, put, patch, delete, and options. All right. So I'm going to copy this. And this is we are going to use as a base URL. So let's go to our application. All right. And here what we need to do is we need to set the base URL. So let me add the base URL. So I'm going to write here and base URL and let's provide the base URL. Now what we will do is since our resource server is the contacts, so let's rename this as contacts API. All right. And let's rename the file as well. So I'm going to change this and I'm going to have the contact API. All right. So we have renamed it so that it becomes more relevant and we have added the base query. Now, what we need to do is we need to create the endpoints so that these endpoints can be used to call the API. So what we will do is let's add the endpoints. So I'm going to write the endpoints. All right. And this endpoints actually uses a builder pattern. So now if you go to the documentation, they haven't specified much about this builder pattern, but we are going to use this endpoint builder. So let me add the builder here. All right. And this builder is going to be an arrow function. And now what we will do is using this builder, we can actually build our endpoints. So the first endpoint is I want to fetch all my contacts. So what I want is I want to have all the contacts. So that's why I'm going to write contacts here. All right. And then we are going to have this builder. And this builder offers us a query method. So I'm going to use dot query. All right. And we have this query method. Now inside this query method, before writing anything, we have to specify that what will be the type here. So I'm going to have the type here. So it's going to return us the contact array. So we don't have the contact type at the moment. So what we are going to do is let's create the interface. So I'm going to go to my source, and here I'm going to add the models. All right. And inside the models, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the contact. So let me add the contact.model.ts. All right. Now let's create the interface. So I'm going to do an export of an interface. So let me add the interface, and the name of the interface will be contact. And what information it's going to have is, so if we go to our JSON server and if we see, then we have the ID, name, and email. So let's add those. So let's go back here. So what we are going to do is let's change this to capital as it's an interface. And here we are going to have the ID, and the type of the ID will be string. All right, then we are going to have the name, and the type of the name will be string, and then we are going to have the email, and the type of the email will be string. All right, so now we have created the interface. Now let's go back here, and we are going to import that interface here. So I'm going to do an import contact. So let me add the contact. All right, so we have imported it, and it's going to return. So we are fetching all the contacts. So it's going to return us a contact array. So let's add the contact, and we are going to have the array of the contacts. All right. And since when we are going to use this query, we are not passing any parameter or any argument. So we are going to have the void here since we are not passing anything here. All right. And now inside this, what we are going to do is we are going to have the query, and this is going to be an arrow function. All right. And then we are going to specify the endpoint. So for us, the endpoint is contacts. So since we have created our first endpoint, if we want to check that how this endpoint looks, then what we can do is we can make use of the endpoint in our component, and we can fetch the data. So before going to that, whenever we create a query, it automatically exposes a hook, which we can use to fetch the data from this endpoint. And let's go down, and what hook it's going to offer is I'm going to write an export because I want to export the hook, and I'm going to write the constant, and let me destructure the hook. So it's going to give us the use contacts. So this is the contacts. So I'm going to write the use contacts, and then I'm going to have the query. So this is the hook it's going to offer. And how we know that what will be the name of the hook is, so you have defined here the contacts. So instead of contact, if you define here get contacts, then in that case, the name of the hook will become use get contacts query. All right. So let's roll back this. All right, and from where this hook is going to be exposed, and this is will be coming from the contacts API. All right, I will save it, and we don't see that we have any errors. Now what we can do is we can actually make use of this use contact query in our app component to fetch the data. But before going to that, we have to bind this create API with our Redux store. So right now we don't have a store, so let's create a store. So I'm going to go to my source. I'm going to create a file, and I'm going to name it as store.js. Oops, I'm sorry, we are using the TypeScript. So this is going to be TSX. So let me add the TSX. Okay, and as usual, we already know how to create the store. So let's import the configure store. So I'm going to have the configure store, and then we have to also import the contacts API. So let me have the import of my contact API. But since I think that we haven't exported the contact API, so let's go back here and let's add the export here. So now we have exported it. So now let's go and let's import it. So I'm going to have the contacts API. All right. And now what we are going to do is we are going to configure the store. So I'm going to write a constant store will be equals to the configure store. All right. And this is going to take an object, and let's export this store so that we can use it in our provider. And the first thing we usually have is the reducer. So let's have the reducer object. All right. And since you will notice that we haven't created any reducer in our contacts API. So how we are going to hook this? We have one more property here, which will be the reducer path. All right. And we can name this reducer path is same as whatever my constant is of contacts API. So I'm going to add the contacts API here. All right. So now we have the reducer path as well. And now we can use this reducer path in our store. So let's go back to the store, and inside this reducer, I'm going to hook this like this. So I'm going to have the contacts here. So let me have the contacts API dot, and we have the reducer path on it. So you will find that on this contacts API, now you have a lot of parameters like the endpoint, enhance endpoint, inject endpoint. So in this way, we are going to use the reducer path. All right. And this reducer path will be the contacts API dot reducer. So let me add the reducer here. So now we have added the reducer, but we also need to add a middleware to it. So what we are going to do is I'm going to add the middleware, and this middleware is actually going to help us in the caching of the server data, or we need to do a validation, or we need to do the polling of our data, and a lot of features of the RTK query. So let's add the middleware. So I'm going to add a middleware here. All right. And inside this middleware, we have to use the get default middleware. So I'm not going to add any external middleware. I'm going to use whatever the default middleware is. So let me add the default middleware. And then this is going to be an arrow function. And I'm going to add the get default middleware. All right. And then we just need to do a concatenation of the middleware, which we are going to use for our contact API. So I'm going to add the concat. And what I want to concat is I want to concat the middleware, which is being used for the contacts API. So let me add the contacts API. And if I see, then we have a middleware here. So let me add the middleware. So this is how we have actually bind our API with the store. Now let's go to the index.tsx and let's bind this. So I'm going to go to the index.tsx and let's add the provider here. So I'm going to add the provider, and then let's end this provider. So I'm going to have the slash provider. All right. So we have already imported the provider as well. And now what we need to do is we need to simply pass the store, whatever the store we have. So let me add the store, and this is going to be equals to the store. All right. But we haven't imported the store. So let me import the store. So I'm going to have the store. All right. And the store will be coming from the dot slash, and let's have the store. So we have the store as well. Now let's say that you are using this RTK query and you are not setting up a store. So in that case, if you still want to use this RTK query, how you gonna do that? So what we are going to do is we have another one, which is the API provider, and you can use this API provider and you can add the API provider here. And in that case, you don't need to set up any store. All right. So this is one of the additional feature which is offered by the RTK query. So I'm going to remove this. All right. We are going to stick with our provider for now. Now let's go and check that are we getting any errors or not. So if I go here, and if I go here, if I refresh my page, then I don't see any error. And if I go to the inspect element, and let's go to Redux store, since we have set up the Redux store, but we don't have anything in our store. If I click on this contact, then you will see that we don't have any queries, mutations, provided, or subscriptions, because we haven't used the hook yet. And now in this app.tsx, I'm going to remove everything. So I don't want all this stuff. So let's remove this header part. All right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to import first the hook, which we have exported. So I'm going to use the use contacts query, and this will be coming from the services. So let me add the services, and inside the services, we have the contact API. All right. So now we have it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click here and I'm going to do a constant. And when I do a constant, this constant will be equals to the use contacts query. All right. And when we use the use context query, it actually exports few properties. So the first property will be the data that we are going to fetch from the server. The next one will be the error state. So if I have the error, I'm going to have the error. Then it's going to have the is loading state. Then it's going to have the is fetching state, and it's also going to have the is success state. So in case of the successful of the API request. All right, and now here what we are going to do is we are going to display the messages. So I'm going to have the h1 tag first, and I'm going to write here React Redux Toolkit RTK Query Tutorial. All right, so let's have the heading, and inside the heading what we are going to have is, first I'm going to write is loading. If we have is loading as true, in that case I'm going to have an h2 tag, and I'm going to write a loading here. So let me add the loading. All right, now if we have the error, so let me have the error, and in that case I'm going to have the h2 again, and I'm going to write here as something went wrong. All right, and I'm also going to copy this for the is fetching. So let me add here, and I'm going to add the is fetching. All right, and let me add the fetching here. Okay, and the last one is that if it's success, then in that case I want to loop through the data. So I'm going to have here is success. All right, and if it's success and if it's true, that in that case I want to return a some JSX. So what I will go and I will do here is I'm going to create a div. So let me have a div. All right, and let's close the div. All right, and now inside the div we are going to use the data, and we're going to loop through all the data, and we're going to display it on the screen. So I'm going to have the data dot map, and when I do a map I'm going to get a contact. So I will spell the map. All right, once I get the contact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to return a div. So let me have a div with a class name of data. So I have already created some basic CSS for this data. So that's why I'm using this data class, and I'm going to provide a key. So let me add the key here, and this key will have the contact.id. Oops. So it should be contact.id. And then inside this div, I'm going to create a span. All right, and the first span will contain the contact name. So let me have the contact dot name. All right, then I'm just going to close this div. All right, and now I have saved it, and we see that we get an error at the data, and that is because the object is possibly undefined. So what we are going to do is I'm going to do a conditional check here. Now let's go and let's see that what we see on the screen. So if I go here and if I minimize this, then we see that we get all the data. If we go here and we see that we have the page mic maximum. So if I go here, then you will see that we have all the names, and we haven't used any Axios or any fetch to call the API. It's automatically handled by the RTK query, and this is where the RTK query is very powerful. So now what we are going to do next is if we go to the inspect element, and let's see what we see in the Redux tab. That the first step is the middleware registered. So it actually registers the middleware. So if we find this, then we see that the middleware. So let me zoom this a little bit. Then we see that we have a middleware registered. So initially it was false, then it changed to true. Now then we make an API call. So that's why it's in the pending state. Then it becomes a fulfilled. And if it's a rejected, then we're going to have a rejected state. All right. So now let's see and let's make a change in the request based URL. So I'm going to go to my API, and if I make a change here, let's add a test here. All right. And I will save it. And now let's go here and let's refresh it. Then in that case, you will see that now it's something went wrong. So if I go to the network tab, then we see a 404 because the URL which we are using doesn't contain any test. So that's why it displays the something went wrong, because we have specified here, if we go here, then in case of an error, we need to see something went wrong. All right. Now let's go back here and let me show you one more thing. So if I refresh it, then you will notice that first the state gets changed to a loading, then fetching, and then we see the data or we see the error. So if I refresh it, then you see that it's a very fraction of a second. And so let's go back and let me make this again, whatever it was before. All right, I'm going to save it and let's go here. And this time, let me refresh my page. So if I refresh my page, you see that we have a loading, fetching, and then we get the data. All right. Now let's create one more endpoint where we are going to fetch an individual contact. So I'm going to go here back and let's go here and I'm going to create a new endpoint. I will come here and I'm going to have the another endpoint which is going to give me a contact. All right, we are going to have the builder as it is. I'm going to do a query to that builder, and this time the type will be, so let me add the type, and the type will be that it's going to return a single contact. So I'm going to add the contact here. All right, but then it's going to return us a contact based on the ID which we pass, and the type of the ID will be string. So I'm going to add the string here. All right, and it's going to take the ID. So let's go and let's write the query. So I'm going to add the query. All right, and this query is going to take the ID which we are going to pass. All right, and then I'm going to have the backtick. I'm going to have the contacts slash dollar the ID. So let's pass the ID here. All right. So now if you see, then we have the contact, which is going to return us from this query. And this is the ID, which is going to take as an input. And as soon as we add it, we are going to have another hook. So this will be the use contact query. All right. Now we can make use of this use contact query in the components. So what I'm going to do is let's go to our app component, and inside the app component, I'm going to create a new component here. So let me add a component. So here I'm going to add a new component. So I'm going to write export constant. I'm going to have the contact detail. All right, and this contact detail is going to get a prop of ID. So let me have the restructure of the ID, and the type of this ID, I want to define it as an ID of type of string. All right, so this is the type we have defined it, and this is going to be an arrow function. I'm going to have the constant, and I just need the data. So what data I need? I need the data from the use contact query. So let me have the contact query. All right, and this contact query is going to take the ID. So we are going to have the ID here. All right, and now what I want to return a JSX. So in the JSX, I'm not going to do much. I'm just going to print whatever the individual contact is. So I'm going to have the pre tag, and inside the pre tag, I'm going to have the JSON.stringify. All right, I'm going to stringify the data we have, and then I'm going to have the undefined. So let me add the undefined, and I'm going to add the 2. Okay, now since we are getting an error because we haven't used the import here, so let's import it. So I'm going to use the use contact query. Okay, so now we have made the contact detail component, but we haven't used the component. So let me copy this, and I'm going to add the component here. So I'm going to create another span. All right, and inside the span, I'm going to add the contact detail. All right, and I'm going to pass the prop. So for the prop, I'm going to have the ID, and I'm going to create a contact.id. And now it should work fine. So we have the contact ID, and we have the contact ID which we are passing. All right, I will save it, and let's go and let's test it. So if I go here and if I refresh my page, then you will see that if I refresh it again, then you will see that we have the loading, we have fetching, and then we have all the contact lists. So this will be all the contact lists, and then we make an API call to get individual contact, which is this individual contact. So this is the contact, and this is the detail of the contact. So if I go to the Redux tab, and let's go to the Redux tab, let's refresh it again, then we will see that we have a lot of steps happening. We have a middleware register, we have then pending, fulfill, and then for each individual contact detail, we have all the pendings, and then we have all the 6 fulfilled. So let's go to the state, and in the state, you will see that we have queries mutations. So this mutation is in another topic which we are going to cover in the next video, where whenever we want to update or whenever we want to create a data, then in that case, it has to be mutation, and we don't write query there. We have to write mutations there. All right. So now we have covered the queries in this video. The next video will be on mutations and invalidations, and we will see how we can make use of the RTK query in a more powerful way, so that it becomes very easy to make the implementation of the data fetching and caching. All right, so now let's go back here and let's see that what we have done so far. So we have created a contacts API with the help of a create API RTK query. And then we have the expose the hooks. We have created the store, which actually binds the create API with the store. And then in the end, we have actually just implemented these hooks which have been created. So we have used the use context query hook, and we have also make use of the use contact hook. Now what we are going to do in this video is that we are going to create 3 more endpoints in our API, which will help us to create a new contact, update an existing contact, and then delete a contact. And whenever we want to send some data to the server, we need to make use of the mutations. Let's go to the official documentation before we start writing any code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the documentation, and here you will see that what is mutations. So mutations are used when you want to send data to the server and apply changes to the local cache. Mutations can also invalidate cache and force refetches. And we are going to see all this in this example. So here, if you want to understand more about the mutation, you can follow this documentation page. I'm going to add all the links in the description below. So now let's go back to our code. And inside the code, what I'm going to do is first, let's go to the create API. So this is the TSX file where we have created our API and we have the endpoints. So if you can see, then we have the endpoints, and the first endpoint was the contacts and the other one was the contact. Now what we are going to do is, if you see here, then these two have the builder.query, because in both the cases, we are not sending any data to the server. We are just fetching the data from the server. So now let's create another endpoint. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to have an add contact, and this add contact will have a builder. All right, and on this builder we have a mutations. So if you can see here, we have a query and the mutation. So in this case, we are going to make use of the mutation. All right, and then what will be the type? So what I'm going to do is, this mutation is not going to return us anything. Like whenever we want to create a new contact, we just have to create a new record, but in the response we don't want anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a void here. All right, and what it's going to accept is, it's going to accept an object which will be a type of contact. So we already have a model of contact. So if I go here in the models and if I click here, then you see that we already have an interface which is a type of contact. So that's what we are going to use here. All right, and then I'm going to have the brackets, and inside the bracket I'm going to have the query first. So let me add the query, and this query will have the contact, the individual contact which we want to create, and this is going to be an arrow function. So let me add the brackets, and inside this we are going to have some attributes. So the first attribute will be the URL, which will be the endpoint of our API. So the URL will be the same as this one. So I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to add it here. All right, the next will be the method. So in order to create a new contact, we are going to make use of a post method. So let's add a post. All right, and then we need to provide the body, and the body will be the new contact which we want to create. So I'm going to have the body here. All right, and I'm going to assign the body as the contact, whatever the contact is. All right, then I will save it, and now you see that we have a new endpoint which is the add contact. Let's create 2 more endpoints which will be for the update contact and the delete contact. So for the update contact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this and I'm going to add it here. All right, and instead of add, I'm going to change this to update. All right, let me make this small u. And when we need to do an update, what we are going to do is, we don't want anything in return, and instead of that we're going to have the contact here, which will be the contact object which we want to update. So what we are going to do here is, in the query here, what we will have is, we are going to have this contact, but we want to update the contact based on the ID. So I'm going to do a destructure, and I will have the ID, and then I'm going to have the rest. So I'm going to take out the ID from the contact object, and I will pass whatever the rest is. All right, and instead of the post, we're going to have the put method, and our endpoint will get now changed to the this one. So we are going to have the contacts slash dollar ID, where the ID will represent that which contact we need to update. All right, I'm going to change this to backticks, and what we need to pass in the body is, we already have the ID which we want to update. We want to pass whatever the rest is. So I'm going to have the rest here. All right, so when I say the rest, if we go to the model and if we remove the ID, then the rest is name and the email ID. All right, so let's go back here and I'm going to do a save on this. So we have the update as well, The next thing we need to do is the delete one. So what I will do is I'm simply going to copy this and I'm going to add it here. And let's change this to delete. So I'm going to change this to delete contact. This will be the builder.mutation void. And whenever we want to delete any contact, we just need to pass an ID. We don't need to pass the whole contact object. So what I'm going to do here is instead of having a contact, I'm going to pass the ID, and the type of the ID will be the string. So it's very similar that whenever you want to fetch an individual contact, you simply pass the ID, which if you go here, we see that when we have the individual contact, we have the ID here. And what we will have here is we are going to have the ID which we want to delete. So the contact, the URL will be same, and the method, instead of the put, it's going to change to delete, and we will not have any body in the delete. So now we have created all the three endpoints, the create, update, and the delete endpoint. So when we create the endpoints, the RTK query exposes some hooks which we can use. So if we go here, then let's export the hooks. So the first one will be the use add contact mutation. Then the other one will be the use update contact mutation. All right. And the last one will be the use delete contact mutation. All right. So now we have exported all the three hooks, and now we can make use of these hooks into our app.tsx file. So let's go to the app.tsx file, and inside the app.tsx file, in order to create any new contact, we need to have a form. But the focus of this video is not to create the form and all those stuff. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to create a component, and I'm going to name it as export constant, and let's give it name as add contact. All right, and this is going to be an arrow function. So we are not doing anything fancy here. If we go back and see, then we have just created three endpoints. So if you have watched the previous video, then you must have understood that what the RTK query is all about. And here we are just using one of its feature, which is the mutation. So let's go back to our tsx file, and inside the tsx file, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a constant of an contact, and this contact will be the individual contact which I want to create. I'm also running my application on the local development environment. So let's go and see how our application looks. So if I go back and I have this application, if I refresh my page, then we see that we have only two contacts at the moment, the Page Malvia and the Mike J. And the contact API which we are using is, I have set up it on the JSON server. Let me show you the JSON server, where you will see that we have only two contacts, and I'm running my JSON server on the localhost 3006. So if I go back and if we go to localhost 3006, then we will be able to see my server. So let's go here, and this will become 3006. All right, so this is the JSON server, and we have only two contacts, so that's why we are only seeing two records. So if you don't know about how to create the JSON server and how to make the fake APIs, then I have a video on it. You can click on the card above and jump to it directly. So let's go back, and what we are going to do here is that we are going to create three buttons which we will use for to add contact, update contact, and delete contact. And here we are going to create a contact object which we will add. So we are going to have the ID. So let me add the ID, and I'm going to give the ID as 3. And then the next thing we are going to have is, what I will do is I'm just going to do a copy paste. So let me copy this and let me add it here. So I'm going to do a copy paste, and let's change the value. So this will become 3, and this will become Nikesh. All right, and let's change the email. So I'm going to change the email as nix@gmail.com. So now we have the contact object, and how we can make use of the add contact API which we have created here. So this is the add contact API. So what we will do is, let's go back, and here we are going to make use of a constant. So let's have a constant, and this constant will be equals to the use add contact mutation. All right, and this is actually going to expose us the endpoint or the method which we have created. So the endpoint was the add contact. All right, now we just have to use this add contact, and how we are going to use this as, I'm going to first have the return my JSX. So let's have the JSX. All right, I'm going to have the empty fragment in the JSX, and then I'm going to create a button. So let's create a button, and inside the button I'm going to have the add contact. All right, and then I'm going to have an on click on this button, and I'm going to have the add handler. So let me have the add handler. All right, so now let's write the definition of this add handler. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a constant. I'm going to do a add handler. This will be equals to an arrow function, and let's give me an async here so that I can use the async await. And then I'm going to have the await, and here I'm going to write the add contact. And when we created the add contact endpoint, it actually takes us the argument, which is the contact object which we want to create. So this is our contact object. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to add my contact object here, and then I will save it. All right, so now we see that we don't have any errors in the console log, and let's give a try what actually happens. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to refresh my page first, and I don't see any add contact button, and that is because we have created the component but we haven't used the component in our app component. So let's go here, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a div here, and inside the div I'm going to have the add contact. All right, I will save it, and now let's go and let's see. So now we see that we have the add contact button. Now let's give a try, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do an inspect element as well. So if I go to inspect element and if I go to the network tab, then we need to see that whenever we click on the add contact, our API gets called and the contact is added in the list. So let's click on the add contact, and when we click on the add contact, you will see that we made an API request, which was the post, and it gives the response back as 201 created. And if we go in the preview and in the response, then we see that we have the add context being added into our list. So let's go here and let's refresh this. So now if I refresh this, then you see that we have the add context. But if we go here in our application, then we have to refresh the page in order to fetch the new list. So if I refresh the page, then we fetch the new data. But I don't want to refresh my page. So what we can do here is that if we go back, then what we will do is let me have a new contact. So I'm going to change this to 4, and instead of Nikesh, I'm going to change this to Amit this time, and let me have an Amit here. And whenever my contact is added, I need to refresh my list. So to refresh the list, what we can do here is we can make use of a constant equals to. So whenever we want to fetch all the new contacts, we usually use the use contact query. So let me copy this, and I'm going to use this here. So let's use it here. And this contact query actually exposes one more function, which is the refetch. So let me add the refetch here. So now we have the refetch, and we can use this refetch to refetch our contacts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply add a refetch here, and that's it. So this is going to refetch all the data. So now if we go back and if I refresh my list, then when I click on the contact, let me clear it. And when I click on the contact, you will see that the new contact is added and the list is automatically refetched. So this is how we can make use of this refetch. So this solution is not so good solution because let's assume that you're using this use contact query at multiple places. And that doesn't mean that you're going to refetch in all the places. You want to build such a solution that whenever a new list is added, it gets automatically refetched in all the places. So for that, what we are going to do here is we're going to make use of the provides and the invalidate. So let's go to our contact API, and inside this here, what we can make use of a tag type. So let me add a tag here, and we're going to have the tag type. All right, and this tag type will be equals to the entity which we have. So for this case, our entity is the contacts. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add the contact here. And now why we are doing this is we need to do the auto fetching. We don't have to manually add the fetch function and then fetch the new data. We need the automatic data fetching whenever there is a change in our entity, like whenever there is a change in the context, whether it's a create contact or update contact or delete contact. So let's go to documentation and let's understand what this auto fetching is. So if I go back here and if we see here, Then this is the auto fetching, and here you will see that what are the tags, what are the providing tags and invalidating tags. So we are going to use all these three in our example so that we can understand what are they and why we use them. So you can read this documentation, and if you don't understand much about this, then you just follow the video so that you know what is the tags are. There is an example as well. So if I go down, then you will see that they have an example and they have a tag type where you specify the tag type as an entity on which you are making the API calls. So here they have two entities, post and the user. That's why they have post and the user as entities. So let's go back to our code, and we have only one, which is the contact. So we have added the contact, and what we are going to do is whenever you make use of a queries, instead of mutation, you need to provide the tags. So let me add the provides tag. So I'm going to write the provides, and then I'm going to have the tag, and this provide tags will either have a string of array or it can also have a callback function. So if we go to the documentation and if we read it, then we will know that what this provide tags argument, it can either be an array of string such as the post, or it can also have an object or a callback function. So for our case, what we are going to do here is we are simply going to have an array of string. So for our case, we have the array, and then I'm going to have the contact here. And I can use the same in my other endpoint, which is the contact, where we fetch the individual contact. So let me add the provide here as well. So we have to use this provides tag if we are using the query. But for the mutations, instead of this, we need to make use of the invalidate tags. So let me copy this, and then I'm going to add the invalidate tags here. So let me have the here. And here, instead of this, I'm going to have the invalidate, and we are going to have the invalidate tags. All right. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to add it in all my mutations endpoint. So let me add it here as well. And let me add it here as well. All right. So I have added it. And if we want to read about the invalidate tags, then you can read it here, that what are these invalidate tags are. It's very similar to the provides tag. The only difference is you use the provide tags when you make the query, but you use the invalidating tags when you actually use the mutations. All right, so now let's go back to our application and I'm going to refresh it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to manually delete these newly created contacts. So if I refresh it, then we should be able to see only two objects. Now what I'm going to do here is that if I click on the add contact, then it's going to add the contact. So let's go to our contact object. So I'm going to go to TSX, and here I'm going to just make the ID as 3. All right, and now let's add it. So if I going to let's do an inspect element. All right, and I will go to the network tab, and now if I click on the contact, then you will see that the contact is added and the newly created contact is also automatically auto fetched, and that is because we have used the provide tag here. So if we go here, then we will see that we have added the provide tag here. All right, now let's create two more buttons to update the contact and to delete the contact. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy this and I'm going to add it 2 times. The first one will be the update handler. So let me add the update handler, and the second one will be delete handler. So let me add the delete handler, and let's change this to update, and let's change this to delete. All right, and I'm going to copy this 2 times so that we can have for the delete and the update. So I'm going to change this to update, and this will become update contact, and I'm going to change this to delete. So let me have the delete, and I'm going to change this to delete as well. So let me have the delete here. All right, and whenever we delete a contact, we just need to add the ID. So I'm going to have the contact dot ID here. All right, for updating the contact, we have to pass the complete contact. So if we go to the contacts API, then you will see that we need to pass the complete contact object. So that's fine. And for the update and delete, yeah, for add handler, it's already working. So what we are going to do here is I'm going to remove this refetch because we don't want it. And I'm going to do a copy of this and I'm going to add it 2 times. This will become the update contact, and here we just need to add the update here. All right, so we have the update contact mutation hook. Similarly, we have the delete. So let me have the delete, and let's change this to delete. All right, so we have the add contact, update contact, and delete contact. And what I'm going to do here is, in order to update a contact, I need to have some updated values. So I'm going to have an contact update object, and I'm going to change this to a myth updated, so that we can see that yeah, the contact is updated. So this will become the updated. Now let's go and let's test everything. So if I go back here and if I refresh it, then we should be able to see everything, but we are getting an error, and this error is because we haven't imported the use update contact mutations. So let's go here and let's import them, and this will become use update contact mutation, and I'm going to have the use delete contact mutation. All right, so we have it now, we have imported them, and now let's go and let's refresh it. All right, so now if I refresh it, then you will see that we have the three contacts, and let's click on the update contact. So when I will click on the update contact, this contact will get updated with the new values and it will get auto fetched. So if I click on the update contact, then you will see that it's updated, it auto fetch, but the values are not visible. So what we are going to do here is if we go back, then we see that for the update, we are still passing the same contact object with no updated values. So for this, I'm going to copy this and I'm going to add it here. All right, I'm going to save it and let's give a try again. So if I refresh my page, then let's clear the browser. And now if I click on the update, then you will see that we have the updated value or myth updated, and all the contacts are auto fetched. So now if I click on the delete, then it's going to delete the contact with an ID of 3. So if I click on delete, then it's deleted. Let's click on add. We are able to add it, we are able to update it, and we are able to delete it. And all these three are happening with the help of the RTK query mutations. And we have also used the tags for auto fetching, which have the provides tag and the invalidates tag. So this is what the RTK query is. This is how you do the CRUD operation in the RTK queries. So that's all I have in this video. I hope you liked the video. A thumbs up is appreciated. You can also connect with me via Facebook or Instagram. You can follow me on Twitter for latest updates. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe the channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss the videos like this one. I will also add the GitHub link in the description so that you can download it and play around it. Thank you. Thanks for watching. In the season of appraisals, if you want something more than salary increments, then don't forget to download the Hirect app. Here you can chat directly with over 120,000 startup founders without any consultants. So click on the link in the description and with Hirect, career hike karke to dekho.